Welcome. Get comfortable. Close your eyes if you'd like. Tonight, we're going to explore something strange, something that lives in the spaces between childhood memory and adult fear. We're diving into the world of mascot horror, a genre that takes the colorful characters of our youth and twists them into something else entirely. Something watching, something waiting. Let's begin where all horror begins, with innocence. Bonnie's Bakery flips the script. Humans bake animals. Picture a small bakery, the kind with checkered floors and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the windows. Bonnie's Bakery looks like the sort of place you'd visit as a child, pressing your nose against the glass display case, choosing which cookie to take home. But Bonnie's Bakery hides something darker beneath its cheerful exterior. In most stories, we expect the predator to be obvious. The wolf, the monster, the thing with teeth. But Bonnie's Bakery inverts this expectation completely. Here, it's not the animals who threaten humanity. It's humanity that has become the predator. The baker, the one who should be creating comfort and warmth, instead uses animals as ingredients. The ovens that should produce sustenance instead become instruments of a grotesque reversal. This inversion is crucial to understanding mascot horror. It takes the safe, the familiar, the nostalgic, and corrupts it from within. A bakery should be a place of community, of sweetness, of simple pleasures. Instead, it becomes an abattoir dressed in pastel colors. The animals aren't monsters here. They're victims. And perhaps that makes the horror even more unsettling, because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the monster wears a smile and an apron. The Joy Gang enforces joy in theme parks. Now, imagine you're walking through a theme park, not as it is today, sanitized and corporate, but as it exists in mascot horror. A place where joy isn't celebrated, but mandated. Where happiness is law. The Joy Gang operates in this twisted paradise. Characters designed to bring laughter, repurposed as enforcers of emotional compliance. Think about that for a moment. Joy, that most spontaneous and uncontrollable of human emotions, transformed into something compulsory, something policed. In these parks, you must smile, you must laugh, you must perform happiness, or face consequences we can only imagine. The mascots, with their permanent grins and glassy eyes, watch every visitor. They measure your joy. They assess your compliance. And if you fail their test, if your smile falters or your laughter sounds hollow, they intervene. This concept taps into a primal fear, the loss of emotional autonomy. We fear being controlled, being forced to perform feelings we don't have. The Joy Gang represents the ultimate corporate invasion, not just of our wallets or our time, but of our inner emotional lives. They want to colonize even your capacity for happiness, to own it, to regulate it. And the most chilling part, they do it with a song and a dance, with bright colors and upbeat music, never breaking character, never acknowledging the dystopian nightmare they're creating. Mama Bear executes for Malik in a web of deception. Let's talk about Mama Bear. In our childhood stories, Mama Bear is protective, fierce but fair. She guards her cubs, keeps them safe, teaches them the ways of the forest. But in mascot horror, protection curdles into something far more sinister. Mama Bear serves Malik, a name that carries weight, that suggests something ancient and malevolent. And in this service, she doesn't protect, she executes. The maternal instinct, one of the most powerful forces in nature, becomes a weapon. Those soft paws can kill. That gentle voice can lie. Deception is key here. Mama Bear looks safe. She sounds safe. Everything about her design is meant to trigger our associations with comfort, with being cared for. But that's the trap, isn't it? She uses our trust against us. She appears as a savior and reveals herself as an executioner. This betrayal of the maternal figure runs deep in our psychology. We are hardwired from infancy to seek comfort from caretakers, to trust those who present themselves as protectors. When that trust is violated, when Mama Bear's embrace becomes a snare, it touches something primal in our fear response. And the fact that she serves Malik adds another layer. She's not even acting on her own corrupted instincts. She's an agent, a tool, which somehow makes it worse. There's a hierarchy of evil here, and Mama Bear is merely one cog in a machine designed to deceive and destroy. Andy the Apple glitches in children's games. From the physical world, we move to the digital. Andy the Apple exists in children's games. Those bright, simple, educational programs designed to teach letters, numbers, basic concepts. He should be helping. He should be safe. But Andy glitches. In our modern age, we've become accustomed to small technical failures. A screen freezes, an app crashes. We restart and move on. But when a children's character glitches, when Andy the Apple's movements become jerky and unnatural, when his voice distorts into something mechanical and wrong, it creates a unique kind of unease. Because glitches represent a loss of control by the creator. They reveal the artifice beneath the surface. They show us that what we thought was real, or at least intentionally designed, is actually fragile, corrupted, malfunctioning. And in that malfunction, something else can emerge. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. Andy the Apple's glitches might be random technical failures. Or they might be something else. Maybe there's something trapped in the code, trying to get out. Or get in. Maybe the glitches are intentional, a warning, a cry for help, or a threat. Children's games are supposed to be the safest digital spaces, carefully curated and monitored. When even those spaces become unstable, when even Andy the Apple can't be trusted to behave as programmed, it suggests that nowhere is truly safe. Not the physical bakeries and theme parks, and not even the digital playgrounds we create for our youngest users. Daisy Diner likely twists diner mascots. Daisy Diner. The name itself evokes Americana, chrome and vinyl booths, milkshakes and jukebox music, a simpler time when diners were community gathering places. You can almost picture Daisy herself, a cheerful waitress character, maybe a flower or a smiling girl in a retro uniform, serving up comfort food with a wink. But in Mascot horror, we know better than to trust that nostalgia. The word likely here is important. It suggests that Daisy Diner exists in that space of rumor and speculation, of stories passed between fans, of something not fully revealed but anticipated with dread. What happens in Daisy Diner? What are the mascots doing when the open sign flicks off and the last customer leaves? Diners are liminal spaces. They exist for travelers, for night shift workers, for the lonely and the lost. They're there at 3 a.m. when you're driving through nowhere and need coffee. They're there in small towns that barely appear on maps. And in that liminality, in that in-between quality, something else can lurk. Perhaps Daisy and her crew serve something other than food. Perhaps the menu has items that shouldn't exist. Perhaps the diner itself is a trap, drawing in the hungry and the weary, and serving them up instead. The inversion of hospitality, the corruption of comfort, the betrayal of the promise that a diner should be a refuge. We don't know the full story of Daisy Diner yet, but we can feel it waiting, can sense its presence in the genre's collective unconscious, another twisted mascot, ready to serve us something we never ordered. The show aired on public access TV originally. Now we step back and consider the medium itself. Public access television. For those too young to remember, public access was the wild west of broadcasting. Anyone could produce content, and it aired on local cable channels in the dead of night or odd afternoon slots. No corporate oversight, no real quality control, just raw, unfiltered content created by whoever had access to a camera and an idea. This is where our Mascot horror show first appeared, not on a major network with standards and practices, not on a streaming service with content algorithms, but on public access, that strange space where local cooking shows aired next to conspiracy theory rants, where puppet shows shared time slots with community bulletin boards. There's something perfect about this origin. Public access feels lost now, a relic of a different media landscape, and that makes it nostalgic. We can imagine stumbling across this show as children, flipping channels and landing on something that shouldn't be there, something that felt wrong but kept us watching anyway. The public access origin also explains how something dangerous could spread. No gatekeepers. No one checking if the content was appropriate. Just a signal broadcasting into homes, available to anyone, including children, especially children home alone after school, filling empty hours with whatever moved across the screen. This is how things get into our heads. This is how mascots become something more than entertainment. They find us when we're young and vulnerable and looking for something to fill the silence. Inspired by Sesame Street and the Muppets. And what inspired these corrupted mascots? The best children's programming ever created. Sesame Street, the Muppets, shows that revolutionized how we thought about education and entertainment for children. Shows that created characters we loved, that taught us letters and numbers and social skills, that populated our childhoods with Big Bird and Kermit and Cookie Monster. This is the cruelest twist of all. Mascot horror doesn't emerge from exploitation animation or cheap knockoffs. It emerges from the best we had to offer. It takes the formula that worked, that genuinely helped children learn and grow, and corrupts it. Because Sesame Street and the Muppets succeeded by creating characters that felt real, characters with distinct personalities, with flaws and quirks, with emotional depth. They weren't just educational tools, they were friends, and that's what made them powerful. Mascot horror understands this power and weaponizes it. It knows that we have deep, emotional connections to these kinds of characters. It knows that somewhere in our unconscious, we still trust the formula. Bright colors, friendly voices, educational content equals safety. So it uses that trust against us. It takes the Sesame Street template and fills it with something else. The same format, the same aesthetic, the same comforting rhythms, but serving a different purpose entirely. And because the form is so familiar, the corruption hits harder. It's not just scary, it's a betrayal. The show was sent July 8, 1993, to 123 Sunrise Street Studio. Specificity creates believability. July 8, 1993. 123 Sunrise Street. These details ground our horror in something that feels real, that could be verified if we just knew where to look. July 8, 1993 summer. Kids would be out of school, home, during the day. Perfect targets for daytime television. The address 123 Sunrise Street has that too perfect quality of fiction, but also the mundane reality of actual addresses. A studio existed there. Something was sent there. A package, a tape, a transmission. What was in that delivery? The master tapes for the show? Instructions? Something else entirely? And who sent it? We don't know. And that gap in knowledge creates space for imagination, for speculation, for fear. This is the foundation of analog horror. The suggestion that somewhere, in some storage facility or abandoned studio, physical evidence exists. Tapes we could watch if we found them. Documents we could read. A paper trail leading back to something real. The date also matters because 1993 feels recent enough to be within living memory for many, but distant enough to be slipping into nostalgia. It's pre-internet, pre-streaming, a time when local television stations operated with less scrutiny, when weird things could air and disappear without leaving digital footprints. Something arrived at 123 Sunrise Street on July 8, 1993. And whatever it was, it started something that we're still trying to understand today. Gordon J. O'Brien is a cynical war veteran handyman. Now we meet Gordon. Gordon J. O'Brien. That full name gives him weight, makes him feel like a real person rather than a character. And what do we know about Gordon? He's a war veteran. He's a handyman. He's cynical. This is our protagonist, or at least one of them. And he's perfect for this role, because Gordon has already seen the worst humanity can offer. War does that. It strips away illusions, forces you to confront violence and death and moral complexity. Gordon came home changed, hardened, cynical. He works as a handyman now, fixing things, solving practical problems, dealing with the physical world. This grounds him. He's not prone to flights of fancy. He's not going to jump at shadows. He's seen real monsters, human ones, which makes it more meaningful when Gordon encounters something he can't explain. When the cynical war veteran, who thought he'd seen everything meets mascots that shouldn't exist, that violate the basic laws of reality, he thought he understood, it carries weight. Gordon represents the adult perspective intruding on this children's show universe. He's not supposed to be here. This isn't his world. But circumstances have brought him into contact with something designed for children, and his presence creates friction. The show doesn't know what to do with someone like Gordon. And Gordon doesn't know what to do with the show. War horrors shaped Gordon's demeanor. Let's sit with this for a moment. War horrors. We don't need the details. Our imaginations fill them in. Gordon saw things that broke something inside him. Things that taught him that the world is cruel, that innocence is temporary, that safety is an illusion. This past trauma becomes a lens through which Gordon views everything, including the mascots. Where others might see whimsy or childhood nostalgia, Gordon sees something else. He sees the way the mascots move, mechanical and wrong. He notices when smiles don't reach eyes, when voices carry undertones of threat. Gordon's war experience also means he's a survivor. He knows how to assess threats, how to stay calm under pressure, how to make hard decisions. These skills, learned in the worst circumstances, now serve him in this strange new war against entities that shouldn't exist. But there's a tragic irony here too. Gordon survived war, came home, tried to build a normal life, and now he's facing a different kind of horror. One that wears the mask of childhood entertainment. One that mocks everything innocent and pure. For Gordon, this might be worse than war. War at least made sense in its brutality. This is corruption of something that should have remained safe. The war shaped Gordon, yes. But now the mascots are reshaping him again, forcing him to confront horrors he never trained for, enemies that don't follow any rules of engagement he learned. The puppets seek hope via rebroadcast. And here's where things become complicated. Because the puppets, these mascot characters that we've been discussing as threats and corrupted things, they want something. They seek hope. Hope through rebroadcast. Think about what that means. These characters exist only when they're being watched. When their signal reaches audiences, they're trapped in whatever footage exists of them. Frozen in time, repeating the same actions over and over unless someone intervenes. The rebroadcast is their chance at continuation, at reaching new audiences, at mattering again. But is this hope genuine? Can we trust the motivations of entities that have already proven themselves dangerous? Or is the desire for rebroadcast itself another trap, another deception? Maybe the puppets are prisoners of their own creation, aware enough to know they're trapped, but unable to change their nature. Maybe they genuinely believe that being seen again will somehow redeem them, save them, transform them back into what they were supposed to be, simple children's entertainment. Or maybe hope is just the lure. Maybe they need audiences for something darker. Maybe being watched feeds them, powers them, allows them to extend their influence beyond the television screen and into our world. The ambiguity here is crucial. Mascot horror works best when we're not entirely sure if we should fear these characters or pity them. when the line between victim and villain blurs. The studio closed a decade before revival. Finally, we learn this. The studio closed 10 years before any revival attempt. A decade of silence. A decade of darkness. The building abandoned. Equipment left to rust. Tapes gathering dust in storage. What happens to a studio in 10 years of neglect? Nature reclaims it. Water damage sets in. Mold grows. The infrastructure decays. But something else might grow too. In that darkness. In that absence of human presence. Who knows what the mascots became? 10 years is long enough for a place to develop a reputation, for stories to spread, for it to become haunted, not just in metaphor, but in the collective imagination of the community. People would walk past the old studio and remember the show, remember the weird puppets, remember feeling uncomfortable watching it as children. And then someone decided to revive it, to go back into that building, to dig out those tapes, to try again. The question is, why? What could possibly motivate someone to resurrect a failed show from a closed studio? Nostalgia? Profit? Something else? Or maybe the studio never really closed. Maybe it just went dark, continued operating in secret, continuing its experiments with mascots and entertainment, and whatever dark purposes drove the original show. The decade gap creates mystery. It gives time for things to change, for the original intent to be forgotten or corrupted, for new players to enter the story with different agendas. And so, we've established our foundation, the corruption of innocence, the inversion of comfort, characters that seek hope through means we don't understand, operating from a studio that shouldn't exist anymore. This is just the beginning. The illusion is set. Now, in our next segment, we'll dive deeper into the science behind the monsters, the experiments that brought them to life, the corporate machinery that enabled their creation. But for now, rest with these thoughts. Picture Bonnie's Bakery, the Joy Gang, Mama Bear and Andy and Daisy, Gordon standing in the ruins of the studio, tapes in hand, wondering what he's stumbled into. The mascots are waiting. They've always been waiting. Playtime Company spanned decades. Playtime Company. When you hear that name, what do you imagine? A toy company. Bright colors. Smiling mascots. Advertisements promising joy and wonder. And on the surface, that's exactly what it was. For decades. Decades. Think about that timeline. Not a few years of operation before something went wrong. Not a flash-in-the-pan startup that made one terrible mistake. No, Playtime Company existed for decades. Multiple generations of children grew up with their toys. Parents who played with Huggy Wuggy as kids bought the same toys for their own children. This longevity is crucial because it means Playtime Company was successful, trusted, beloved. They had time to perfect their image, to embed themselves in culture, to become not just a company but an institution. When you have that kind of staying power, you also have something else. The ability to hide things. What can a company do over decades that it can't do in years? It can run long-term experiments. It can develop technologies slowly, carefully, away from public scrutiny. It can make mistakes, bury them, learn from them, and try again. Each generation of employees might only see part of the picture. The institutional knowledge, the true purposes, the dark experiments, those exist in restricted files, in sub-basements, in departments with no names on their doors. Playtime Company didn't become monstrous overnight. It had decades to perfect its monstrosity, to normalize it, to build systems that made the unthinkable seem routine. By the time anyone noticed something was wrong, the infrastructure of horror was already complete, embedded so deeply in the company's operations that removing it would mean dismantling everything. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part. Somewhere in some boardroom, executives made presentations about quarterly earnings while below them, in the innovation labs, something else entirely was being created. Elliot pioneered toy dreams. Every horror has an architect. For Playtime Company, that architect was Elliot. We don't need to know his full name. We don't need his biography. What we need to understand is what he pioneered. Toy dreams. Toy dreams. What a beautiful phrase. What a perfect piece of corporate speak that hides something darker. On its face, it suggests toys that children dream about, toys that fulfill fantasies, that make the imaginary real. But dig deeper, and the phrase becomes more sinister. What if toy dreams means toys that dream? Toys with consciousness, with desires, with needs? What if Elliot didn't pioneer toys for children to dream about, but toys that themselves could dream, could think, could want? Elliot was a pioneer, which means he was first. He went where no one else had gone. He asked questions others were afraid to ask. And in that pioneering spirit, he crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed, pursued research that should have remained theoretical. The greatest pioneers in history share a common trait. They don't know when to stop. They're so consumed by the question, can we, that they never pause to ask, should we? Elliot saw the possibility of creating something revolutionary. Toys that weren't just objects, but entities. And he pursued it with the single-minded focus that defines both genius and madness. And Playtime Company let him. They funded his research, provided facilities, gave him access to resources and subjects. Because Elliot's toy dreams represented something valuable. Intellectual property that could be monetized, patents that could be protected, products that could be sold. What happened in those labs? What did Elliot create in pursuit of his dreams? The toys themselves will tell us soon enough. But understand this. Every nightmare needs a dreamer. Elliot was Playtime Company's dreamer, and we're still living in the world his dreams created. The Afton family cursed the pizzeria. Now, we shift locations from Playtime Company to a pizzeria. The Afton family. If Elliot represents corporate pioneering, the Aftons represent something more personal, more intimate, more tragic. A family curse. Pizzerias should be simple places. Pizza, arcade games, birthday parties. Places where children celebrate, where families gather, where joy is manufactured through cheese and tokens and mechanical entertainment. But the Afton family turned their pizzeria into something else. A curse. That's the only word that fits. The Aftons didn't just own a business. They infected it with generational trauma, with obsession, with the kind of darkness that only families can create. Because families know each other's weaknesses. Families carry secrets that compound over years. Families have legacies. William Afton. Even if we don't say his name in full, we know the type. The patriarch, the inventor, the man with brilliant ideas and darker compulsions. He built animatronics to entertain children, but he built them for other purposes too. And his family became entangled in what he created. The curse of the Afton family isn't supernatural, at least not at first. It's the curse of ambition meeting moral bankruptcy, of technological capability outpacing ethical consideration, of a man who could build anything asking himself what he should build and choosing the wrong answer every time. And his family paid the price. His children, his wife, everyone touched by the Afton name became part of the curse, carriers of it, victims of it. The pizzeria itself became haunted, not by ghosts in the traditional sense, but by the consequences of what the Aftons did there, by the memories embedded in metal and circuit boards and programming. When we think of corporate horror, we often imagine faceless executives. But sometimes horror is deeply personal. Sometimes it's one man's obsession manifesting as a family business. Sometimes the worst monsters are the ones who go home at night and sit at the dinner table with their children. The Marionette gifts life post-murder. And here's where things become metaphysically complex. The Marionette, a puppet that should be controlled by strings, by a puppeteer. But this Marionette has agency. This Marionette gifts life. Post-murder. Those two words carry immense weight. They tell us that death came first, that innocence was violated, that a line was crossed that can never be uncrossed. And then, after that murder, the marionette acted. Gifting life post-murder suggests several possibilities. Maybe the marionette is attempting to correct what was done, to restore what was taken. Maybe it's trying to create balance, to give back what murder stole. Or maybe, and this is darker, maybe the marionette doesn't understand the difference between life and undeath, between restoration and resurrection, between saving and cursing. Because what kind of life can be gifted after murder? Is it true life, or is it something else? An echo, a memory, a soul trapped in metal. The marionette might think it's helping, might genuinely believe it's performing an act of mercy or justice. But the results tell a different story. The children, because we know it's children. It's always children in these stories. They don't move on. They don't find peace. The life the marionette gifts them is a prison. They become the animatronics, bound to the pizzeria, trapped in mechanical bodies, forced to relive their trauma night after night. The marionette represents a horrifying possibility, that even rescue can be torture, that even an attempt to restore life can result in something worse than death. It's the ultimate corruption of innocence. A puppet designed to entertain children becomes the mechanism of their eternal imprisonment. And perhaps the marionette is as trapped as those it tries to help. Perhaps it, too, is a victim, cursed to endlessly repeat this ritual of false resurrection, believing each time that this time it will work, this time the life it gifts will be real. Sister Location hides the scoops. Sister Location. The name suggests expansion, growth, a second facility. In corporate terms, it means success. Business was good enough to open another location. But in this context, Sister Location means something darker. It's the place where the real experiments happen. The main location is public-facing. It's where customers come, where families visit, where everything must appear normal and safe and profitable. But Sister Location? Sister Location is where you can do things away from scrutiny. And what Sister Location hides are the scoops. The scoops. Even the word is carefully chosen. Scoops could be innocent. Ice cream scoops, scoops of fun. But here, scoops mean something far more sinister. The scooper, a device designed to remove, to hollow out, to create empty spaces where something solid used to be. The scooper doesn't kill cleanly. It removes internal organs, creates shells, makes room for something else. It's a tool of transformation, of conversion. It takes a human and creates a space for an animatronic to hide inside. Or perhaps it removes the animatronic and creates space for a human to be stuffed inside. Either way, the scooper represents the ultimate violation. The forced merging of human and machine, of organic and mechanical, of life and artificial movement. It's the logical endpoint of what the Aftons started, what Elliot pioneered, what Playtime Company funded. And Sister Location hides this. It's where the screams don't reach the public. It's where mistakes can be buried. It's where experiments that fail can be classified as industrial accidents. The Sister Location is the shadow self of the main pizzeria, the place where the ID runs free while the ego maintains appearances downtown. Every corporation has a sister location, some literal place where the real work happens, where the moral compromises are made, where the products are actually created using methods that would horrify the consumers who buy them. Sister Location just makes it literal. This is where we scoop out the insides of things and replace them with something else. Funtime animatronics shock and kidnap nightly. The Funtime series. Even the name mocks us. Funtime suggests entertainment, suggests joy, suggests exactly what animatronics are supposed to provide. But these Funtime units were designed with additional features, shocking capabilities, built-in tasers, electrical systems designed to incapacitate, Why would a children's entertainment animatronic need the ability to shock people? The answer is obvious and horrible, because these animatronics weren't just for entertainment. They were for capture, kidnapping nightly. This isn't accidental. This isn't a glitch or malfunction. This is programming. This is intentional design. The Funtime animatronics operate on a schedule, nightly, which means someone planned for this, created systems to enable this, probably monitored the results. Think about the engineering required. The animatronics need to identify targets, approach without raising alarm, deploy the shocking mechanism, secure the victim, and transport them somewhere. Each step requires sophisticated programming, mechanical capability, and most chillingly, someone writing the code, someone designing the containment systems, someone saying, yes, this is what we want our robots to do. Who are they kidnapping? We can guess. Children, probably. The vulnerable. Those who won't immediately be missed, or whose disappearances can be explained away. And where do the kidnapped go? Perhaps to sister location, perhaps to laboratories, perhaps into the experiments that require fresh subjects. The word nightly also suggests this has been happening for a long time. Not one incident, not a few isolated cases, but an ongoing operation. Night after night, the Funtime animatronics perform their true function, and in the morning they reset, ready to entertain children during birthday parties, ready to smile and wave and sing songs, all while carrying the memory of last night's capture in their programming. This is corporate horror at its most efficient. The same product serves two purposes. During the day, it generates revenue through entertainment. At night, it generates test subjects for research. Maximum return on investment. Givanium overdose mutates victims. Now we introduce the science. Givanium, another life-giving compound, another substance that promises miracles and delivers monsters. An overdose suggests that there's a safe dose, a therapeutic amount. Givanium, in proper quantities, does something useful. Perhaps it heals, perhaps it enhances, perhaps it enables the kind of animation we've been discussing. But too much, and mutation occurs. Mutation isn't just change. It's wrong change. It's cells replicating in patterns they shouldn't, structures forming that violate biological rules, the body becoming something other than what it was designed to be. Givanium overdose doesn't kill cleanly. It transforms, and those transformations are irreversible. What do the mutations look like? We can imagine. Limbs extending beyond normal proportions, skin changing texture and color, consciousness fragmenting as the brain structures that support it warp into new configurations. The victims probably remain aware during the transformation, feeling their bodies betray them, feeling themselves become less human with each passing moment. And this raises questions about dosage. If overdose causes mutation, then someone is measuring doses. Someone is calculating how much is too much, which means someone has given non-overdose amounts, which means there are successful test subjects out there walking around with givanium in their systems, changed but not mutated, altered but still functional. The overdose victims are the failures, the cautionary tales, the warnings that the scientists probably ignore as they continue to push boundaries. Because every scientific breakthrough requires failed experiments. Every successful dose is preceded by dozens of overdoses, each one teaching the researchers a little more about the substance's effects. Givanium represents humanity's eternal gamble. We find something powerful and immediately try to use it. Consequences be damned. We always believe we can control it, that we can find the right dose, the safe application, and we're always wrong. Genome transfer gives mascots identities. Now we're in truly disturbing territory. Genome transfer. This isn't just putting substances into bodies. This is rewriting the fundamental code of existence. Genomes contain identity. They're the instruction manual for what an organism is, how it develops, what it becomes. Transfer that genome to something else, and you're not just changing it, you're giving it a different essential nature, giving mascots identities. Through genome transfer means the mascots weren't just built or programmed. They were born, in a sense. They have biological components, genetic material taken from somewhere or someone and transferred into their structures. This explains so much. Why the mascots seem more than mechanical, why they have personalities that feel organic rather than programmed, why they have needs and desires and fears that go beyond their coding. Because they do have coding, genetic coding, DNA that carries memories and instincts, and maybe even fragments of whoever the genome was taken from. Are the mascots aware of this? Do they have flashes of memory from their genetic donors? Do they sometimes think thoughts that aren't their own? Feel impulses from bodies they never had? The genome transfer creates a horrifying kind of identity crisis. Am I the mascot? Or am I the ghost of whoever gave me these genes? And who were the donors? We can guess. We always return to the same answer in mascot horror. Children. Their genomes transferred to mascots, creating entertainment that's literally built from the genetic material of its intended audience. The ultimate in targeted marketing. Use the children to make the products that entertain children. Genome transfer also means these mascots can reproduce, can evolve, can develop in ways their creators never intended. Biology always finds a way to surprise us. The mascots aren't just objects anymore. They're organisms. And organisms have drives that transcend programming. Survive, adapt, spread. The ink demon floods studios black. We shift mediums now. From genetic material to ink. From biological horror to something more artistic, more symbolic. The ink demon. Ink is how we create. How we write, draw, animate. Ink brings ideas into physical reality. Makes the imaginary visible. But the ink demon represents ink corrupted, ink with agency, ink that creates not what we want but what it wants. Flooding studios black. The image is overwhelming, a tsunami of ink, drowning everything, turning workspaces into liquid darkness. Black ink specifically, not colorful, not vibrant, but the absence of color, the negation of light. Everything the ink touches becomes part of it. Absorbed into the flood, integrated into the ink demon's expanding form. Studios are where creation happens, where artists bring characters to life, where animators make the static move. The ink demon flooding these spaces means creation itself has been corrupted. The tools used to make joy now make horror. The same ink that once drew smiling cartoon characters now manifests as a demon that consumes everything. And flooding suggests this isn't contained. It's not a spill you can clean up with towels and soap. It's a catastrophic event, a breaking of boundaries, ink going where it was never meant to go, into hallways, into offices, into storage rooms, into air ducts. The studio becomes a single entity, every surface coated in black, every room connected by flowing ink. The ink demon doesn't just destroy the studio, it transforms it into its own domain, its own body. The building becomes the demon. Every pipe is a vein, every room is an organ, and anyone caught inside when the flooding happens becomes part of it too, dissolved into ink, their essence mixed into the demon's mass. This is creation turned predator. This is what happens when the medium gains consciousness and decides it doesn't want to be controlled anymore. Ink cycles trap souls eternally, and here's the final, crushing revelation about the ink demon's domain. The cycles. Time doesn't move forward in the ink-flooded studio. It loops. It repeats. It cycles. Souls, and we're explicitly told there are souls involved, become trapped in these cycles. They live the same moments over and over. They die and resurrect and die again in eternal repetition. The ink doesn't just kill them. It imprisons them in a loop of death and rebirth with no hope of escape. Why cycles? Perhaps because animation itself is cyclical. You draw the same character over and over, making tiny changes to create the illusion of movement. Each frame is its own moment, but taken together, they create a loop. The character runs, the loop resets, the character runs again. The ink demon has made this metaphorically real. The souls trapped in ink are stuck in their own animation loops, repeating their last moments eternally. This is torture refined to its purest form. Physical death might be terrible, but at least it ends. The ink cycles never end. The souls can't move on, can't escape, can't even die properly. They're stuck in a state of perpetual almost death, always approaching the end, but never reaching it, always starting over just before conclusion. And eternally means exactly that. Not for a long time, not until someone rescues them. Eternally, forever. These souls will cycle long after the studio is demolished, long after everyone who worked there is dead, long after the world forgets that the studio ever existed. The ink remembers. The ink preserves. The ink cycles. The ink demon has created a hell, not the fire and brimstone kind, but something arguably worse. A hell of repetition, of meaningless recurrence, of being denied the one mercy we can usually count on, that eventually everything ends. And so we've toured the darkest corporate experiments, Playtime Company's decades of hidden research, Elliot's pioneering of toy dreams, the Afton family's curse spreading through generations, the Marionette's terrible gift of false life, sister locations, scooping rooms, funtime animatronics hunting nightly, Givanium mutations, genome transfers creating identity from stolen genetics, the ink demon flooding creation itself, and souls trapped in eternal cycles. These aren't isolated incidents. They're connected by a common thread, the corporate impulse to create, to innovate, to profit, combined with the complete absence of ethical boundaries. When companies ask, what can we create, instead of what should we create, when profit matters more than humanity, when efficiency trumps morality, this is what results. The mascots we've discussed aren't aberrations. They're products. Engineered, tested, refined, mass-produced. The horror isn't that they exist. The horror is that someone designed them to exist this way. Someone approved the budgets. Someone built the facilities. Someone hired the researchers and told them to push boundaries and ignored the screams that echoed from the laboratories at night. This is the corporate abyss. And once you've seen it, you can never look at a simple toy the same way again. We've reached the bottom, but there's still more to explore, because beyond the corporate machinery, beyond the science and the engineering, there's another layer. The supernatural, the rituals, the cults, the forces that even the corporations can't fully control. But that's for our next segment. For now, rest in the knowledge of what humanity is capable of building when nobody asks us to stop. We've established the illusion, the corruption of innocence, the places where childhood should be safe but isn't. Now, we need to understand how this happened, not metaphorically, but literally. How do you take something inanimate and make it alive? How do you transform a mascot from fabric and metal into something that moves with its own volition? This is where we enter the laboratories, the research facilities, the places where scientists asked questions they shouldn't have asked and found answers that should have remained undiscovered. Welcome to the science of creating monsters. Ganem, a life-giving compound, animated the mascots. Every horror needs a catalyst, a substance, a discovery for our mascots. That catalyst was Ganem. Ganem, the name sounds clinical, scientific. It could be a pharmaceutical compound, something developed in a laboratory, synthesized through careful chemistry. Or maybe it's something older, something discovered rather than created. Either way, Ganem has a specific property. It gives life. Not life in the way we usually understand it. Not biological life with cells and metabolism and DNA, but animation, movement, the spark that makes the inanimate move as if it's alive. When Ganem is introduced to a mascot, to fabric and stuffing, to metal joints and plastic eyes, something changes. The mascot twitches, then moves, then acts with what appears to be purpose, intention, will. This is the dream and the nightmare of every creator. To make your creation truly alive, artists paint and sculpt, trying to capture life in static forms. Engineers build robots that can mimic living movement. But Ganem offers something more, actual animation, not simulation. The mascots don't just move like they're alive. In some fundamental way, they become alive. But what is life without consciousness? What is animation without awareness? These are questions the scientists probably didn't ask until it was too late. They were so focused on achieving animation that they didn't consider what they were actually creating. Beings that move, but perhaps can't understand why. Entities that exist, but might not want to. Life given without consent, without preparation, without any consideration of what that life might feel like from the inside. Ganem is the foundation of everything that follows. Without it, the mascots remain objects. With it, they become something else, something new, something that doesn't fit neatly into our categories of alive and dead, natural and artificial, creation and creator. Ganem delivery was limited, sparking experiments. But there's a complication. There isn't enough Ganem to go around. Delivery is limited. Maybe it's difficult to produce. Maybe it's rare in nature. Maybe the source has been depleted or controlled or cut off. Whatever the reason, the scientists face a problem. They've discovered something revolutionary, but they can't get enough of it. Limited resources drive innovation, but they also drive desperation. When you know something works, but you can't access enough of it, you start experimenting. You try to stretch the supply. You look for alternatives. You take risks you wouldn't take if resources were abundant. The limitation of Ganem. And we notice the name shifts slightly here, Ganem to Ganem, suggesting perhaps these are related compounds, variants, different forms of the same basic substance. This limitation becomes the justification for everything that follows. The scientists can say, we had no choice. We had to experiment. We couldn't stop our research just because we ran out of the ideal compound. This is how ethical boundaries erode, not through sudden, dramatic violations, but through incremental compromises driven by scarcity. If we had unlimited Ganem, we would use it properly. But since we don't, we have to improvise. We have to try things. We have to push boundaries. The experiments that follow aren't motivated by curiosity alone. They're motivated by necessity. Or at least, that's what the scientists tell themselves. That's how they justify what they're about to do. Usman received notes about Ganem shortages from Southern friends. Now we meet Usman, a scientist, presumably someone connected to this research. And Usman is receiving notes. Not official reports, but personal communications from friends in the South. These friends are experiencing the same shortage, which tells us several things. First, that the research is distributed, happening in multiple locations. Second, that the shortage is widespread, not just a local problem. Third, that the scientists are communicating informally, sharing information through personal networks rather than official channels. Why notes from friends instead of official communications? Maybe because the research itself is unofficial. Maybe because what they're doing operates in a gray area, legally or ethically, and they can't risk formal documentation. Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe Usman and these Southern friends are the only ones who truly understand what Ganem can do, and they're trying to help each other navigate the shortage. The South. The mention of a specific direction creates geography, suggests a world where this research is happening simultaneously in different locations, maybe even different climate zones, different ecosystems. The Southern friends might have access to different resources, different test subjects, different approaches to the same fundamental problem, and they're all running out of Ganem, which means the experiments are about to become more desperate, more varied, more willing to try anything that might compensate for the missing compound. Usman, reading these notes, represents a moment of decision. The shortage is confirmed. The problem is real. Now what? Give up the research? Or push forward, knowing that without sufficient Ganem, the results might be unpredictable, uncontrollable, dangerous? We know which choice Usman made. We know because of what comes next. Opala bird was the first success, twitching from Ganem infusion. The first success, Opala bird, a name that sounds almost beautiful, almost innocent. A bird, creatures that represent freedom, flight, natural grace. But this bird isn't natural. This bird is the first successful animation using Ganem infusion. Twitching, not smooth movement, not graceful flight, just twitching. Involuntary spasms that might be the beginning of true animation or might be something else. Electrical impulses, firing through a nervous system that shouldn't exist. Muscles contracting in response to chemical stimulation. A body trying to understand what it's become. But it's success. For the scientists watching, Opala bird twitching represents breakthrough. Proof of concept. Evidence that Ganem infusion can work, can create movement, can animate a mascot. They probably celebrated, probably documented everything, took measurements, prepared to replicate the results. What they might not have considered is what success means from Opala bird's perspective. If the bird has any awareness, any experience of this twitching existence, what is it feeling? Confusion? Pain? Terror? Or nothing? Just blind animation, movement without meaning, life without consciousness? The bird is named Opala, which suggests it was given identity, treated not just as an experiment, but as an entity. Someone named it. Someone looked at this twitching mass of feathers and animation and saw enough personhood to give it a designation, and calling it the first success implies there were failures before it, experiments that didn't work, mascots that remained inert, or that animated wrong, or that fell apart when the Ganem was introduced. Opala bird stands on a foundation of failure, of trial and error, of learning through destruction. The bird twitches, and the scientists move forward, emboldened by success, ready to push further. Cases 2 to 6 failed using mammalian systems before Ganem. Now, we learn about the failures. Cases 2 through 6, 5 experiments, all failed, all using mammalian systems. Mammalian systems. This suggests the scientists tried to use actual biological material, tissues or organs, or genetic material from mammals. Before they discovered Ganem, before they knew about life-giving compounds, they tried the traditional route, use biological components to create biological results. But mammalian systems failed 5 times. 5 cases where the scientists tried to create animation through conventional biology and couldn't make it work. Maybe the tissues rejected the artificial structures. Maybe the organic couldn't integrate with the mechanical. Maybe the experiments died. If you can die when you were never fully alive during the process, these failures are important because they show us the progression of the research. The scientists started with what they knew, biology. When that didn't work, they had to look elsewhere. They had to find something that could bridge the gap between organic and artificial, between natural life and created animation. The numbering is significant too. Cases 2 to 6 means there was a case 1, probably a success or at least a promising start. And the fact that they kept trying through 6 iterations shows persistence, commitment to the research despite repeated failure. Each case probably taught them something, refined their understanding, brought them closer to the solution they'd eventually find in Ganem. But what happened to these failed cases? Were they destroyed? Preserved? Are they still somewhere in storage? Dead experiments that never achieved animation? Or did they achieve something else? not life, but not quite death either, existing in some in-between state that the scientists couldn't understand or control. Sawdust bird resulted from flamingo ganem DNA cross, and now the experiments become truly strange. Sawdust bird. The name alone tells us this is wrong. Birds aren't made of sawdust, but this one is. Flamingo ganem DNA cross. The scientists are mixing genetic material from a flamingo with ganem. They're trying to create something hybrid, something that combines biological DNA with the life-giving properties of the compound. And the result is a bird made of sawdust. This suggests the DNA directed the structure, but the ganem provided a different kind of material than biology would. Instead of flesh and feathers, sawdust. A material that's dead wood, processed, artificial in its form. The bird is animated sawdust shaped by flamingo genetics. What does sawdust bird look like? We can imagine the approximate shape of a flamingo, the long neck and legs, but composed of compressed sawdust, probably held together by some kind of binding agent, moving in jerky, unnatural ways because sawdust isn't meant to move, and yet it does move. That's the horrible success of it. The experiment worked in the sense that it created animation, but it failed in the sense that the result is abomination, a mockery of the natural creature whose DNA was used, a thing that shouldn't exist but does. The scientists are learning to manipulate the parameters. They can combine DNA with ganem. They can create hybrid forms, but they can't control what those forms become. Each experiment is a gamble, a roll of cosmic dice that determines whether the result will be merely strange or actively horrifying. Bird experiment number 10, protected small voices. Bird experiment number 10, which means there were birds 1 through 9 before it, each one a different attempt, a different configuration of DNA and ganem and whatever other variables the scientists were testing. But number 10 did something unexpected. It protected small voices. Small voices. Children, presumably. Or maybe other small creatures, other experiments that had gained the ability to vocalize. Number 10 developed a protective instinct, placed itself between threats, and these small voices acted as guardian. This is the first hint of purposeful behavior beyond simple animation. Number 10 isn't just moving, it's acting with intention. It's making decisions based on something, programming, instinct, consciousness, and those decisions show care, protection, an impulse to defend the vulnerable. Did the scientists design this protective behavior, or did it emerge spontaneously? Number 10 developing its own values and priorities? The fact that it's noteworthy suggests it wasn't planned, wasn't expected. The bird decided on its own to protect small voices. This is both heartening and disturbing. Heartening, because it suggests the animated mascots can develop positive traits, can act with kindness. Disturbing, because if they can develop protective instincts on their own, they can develop other instincts too. Aggressive ones, vengeful ones, survival instincts that might conflict with human interests. Number 10 protecting small voices is a moment of innocence in the horror, a reminder that these created beings might not be monsters by nature. They might be capable of good, of care, of choosing to help rather than harm. But that capacity for choice, that agency, makes them unpredictable, and unpredictability in the laboratory is dangerous. Syringean tortured cases like the blubs. Now we meet something darker. Syringean. The name combines syringe with a suggestion of something living, something that moves. And what Syringean does is torture. The blubs, test subjects, experiments, entities created through the same processes we've been discussing. They're called blubs, which makes them sound soft, harmless, perhaps cute, but Syringean tortures them. This raises immediate questions. Is Syringean another created entity, an animated mascot that developed cruel tendencies? Or is Syringean a tool, A device used by the scientists to test the limits of their creations? Either way, torture is happening in these laboratories. Why torture the blubs? Perhaps to test their durability, their response to pain, their capacity for suffering. Perhaps to punish disobedience, to condition behavior. Perhaps simply because the scientists want to know what happens, want to map the limits of these new forms of life they've created. The casual mention of this torture is chilling. It's presented as fact, as something that happens, without moral commentary. Syringeon tortured cases like the blubs, as if this is just another data point in the research, another variable to track. But torture requires the capacity to suffer. If the blubs can be tortured, they can feel pain, which means they're not just animated objects. They're beings with experiences, with sensations, with the ability to suffer. And the scientists either don't care or don't recognize this. So, focused on their research that they've lost sight of what they're actually doing. Singe oppressed mascots before rebellion. Singe, another entity, another experiment, and Singe's role was oppressor. Singe kept the other mascots down, controlled them, prevented them from acting freely. Before rebellion, which means the rebellion came. The mascots that were being oppressed eventually rose up. They fought back. They rejected Singe's control, and the system that created Singe to control them. This is the logical endpoint of creating sentient beings and trying to maintain control over them. You can oppress for a time. You can use fear, force, surveillance to keep your creations in line. But if they're truly alive, truly conscious, eventually they'll recognize their oppression, and eventually they'll rebel. Singe might have been designed as a control mechanism, a way for the scientists to manage their growing population of animated mascots. But Singe failed. The mascots found a way to overcome their oppressor, to break free from control. The rebellion marks a turning point. Before it, the mascots were victims, subjects, experiments. After it, they became something else, agents of their own fate, entities that refused to be controlled. The scientists lost their grip on what they'd created. The experiments escaped the laboratory, metaphorically and perhaps literally. And if Singe could be overthrown, what else could the mascots do? What other systems could they rebel against? What would they do with their newfound freedom? Genome transfer, ganium doses, givanium overdose. Now we zoom out slightly, look at the broader science underlying these experiments. Genome transfer gives mascots identities. We've touched on this before, but it's worth restating. The scientists are transplanting genetic information, complete instruction sets for biological beings, into their mascots. This isn't just animation. This is giving the mascots foundational identity, the code that determines what they are at the most basic level. Small ganium doses cause instant death. The compound that gives life can also take it away, instantly, if administered incorrectly. This reveals how delicate the process is, how fine the line between animation and destruction. The scientists are working with something powerful and dangerous, something that requires precise measurement and application. Givanium overdose mutates victims, another variant of the life-giving compound, and this one's effect is mutation. Too much givanium doesn't just kill. It transforms, warps, changes the victim into something they weren't meant to be. We've discussed this before, but in context with the other facts, it emphasizes the theme. These compounds are powerful, useful, and incredibly dangerous. Used correctly, they create life. Used incorrectly, they create monsters. And so we understand the science now. The compounds, ganum, banum, ganium, givanium. The experiments, bird after bird, case after case, hybrid after hybrid. The successes like Opala bird and number 10, and the failures like cases 2 to 6. The torture, the oppression, the inevitable rebellion. This is how you create monsters. Not through magic, not through supernatural forces, through science, through experimentation, through the systematic application of compounds that can animate the inanimate, give life to objects, transfer consciousness and identity into vessels never meant to hold them. The scientists thought they were pushing boundaries, making breakthroughs, advancing human knowledge. And they were. But they were also creating beings capable of suffering, capable of protecting, capable of rebelling. They were playing God without understanding what that meant, without considering the consequences of bringing new life into existence without consent, without preparation, without any plan for what to do when that life developed its own will. The mascots are alive now. The science worked. But the scientists have lost control. The rebellion came, and what was meant to be entertainment, what was meant to be controllable animation, has become something else entirely. Something aware, something angry, something that remembers being tortured and oppressed and experimented upon. The science of creating monsters is successful. But success, in this context, might be the greatest horror of all. We've seen how they were made. Now, we need to see what they became, especially when the experiments shifted focus from birds and abstract mascots to something more precious, more innocent, more horrifying. Now, we need to talk about the children. We've seen the science. We understand how animation works, how mascots can be brought to life through compounds and genetic manipulation. But so far, we've been talking about birds, about abstract creatures, about experiments that, while disturbing, maintain some distance from true horror. Now that distance collapses. Now we talk about what happens when scientists stop experimenting on mascots and start experimenting on children. When the boundary between creator and creation, between scientist and subject, between adult and child is violated in the most fundamental way. This is where mascot horror becomes truly monstrous. Dr. Trenton transformed kids into rainbow friends in a lab. Dr. Trenton, a name, a person, not a faceless corporation or an abstract system, but an individual who made a choice. And that choice was to transform children. Rainbow friends. The name is deliberately cheerful, deliberately innocent. Friends in rainbow colors. It sounds like something from a children's show, from educational programming, from the kind of entertainment that's meant to help kids learn about diversity and cooperation. But these rainbow friends were children once, real kids, and Dr. Trenton took them into a laboratory and transformed them, not metaphorically, not gradually through indoctrination or education, literally transformed them, changed their bodies, their forms, their very existence. How did Dr. Trenton acquire these children? Were they volunteers? Unlikely. Were they orphans, runaways, children no one would miss? Probably. Or maybe they were promised something, a cure for illness, a chance to be special, an adventure. Maybe their parents signed consent forms they didn't understand. Maybe there were no forms at all. The transformation process probably used everything we've learned about Ganem compounds, genome transfers, the science of animation. But applying these processes to actual children, to beings with consciousness and memory and identity, is categorically different from applying them to mascots or birds. Because children remember. They know what they were before. They understand that they've been changed, violated, turned into something they never chose to become. The rainbow friends carry that knowledge inside their transformed bodies. They remember being human, and that memory, that awareness of what was taken from them, shapes everything they are now. Kids hated the mascot suits, sparking rage, before the full transformation. Maybe there were suits, mascot costumes that the children were forced to wear, made to perform in, trapped inside, and the kids hated them. Of course they did. Mascot suits are hot, claustrophobic, heavy. They restrict vision and movement. They force you to perform joy while feeling miserable inside. For children forced into these suits against their will, the experience would be torturous, physically uncomfortable, and psychologically devastating. But the hatred goes deeper than discomfort. The suits represent their entrapment, their loss of identity. Inside a mascot suit, you're not yourself anymore. You're the character. You have to move and act and be what others expect, regardless of what you feel inside. And this hatred sparked rage. Not sadness, not resignation, rage. The kind of burning anger that comes from profound violation, from being stripped of autonomy, from being used. The rage is important because it tells us these children weren't broken by what was done to them. They didn't accept it. They fought back emotionally, even if they couldn't fight back physically. And that rage would carry forward into their transformation, would become part of who they are as rainbow friends. Rage doesn't disappear when the body changes. It intensifies. It finds new expression. The children who hated the suits became the rainbow friends who carry that hatred in their new forms, who remember what was done to them, who want revenge. Blue was the first friend, loyal but monstrous. Blue, the first rainbow friend, the first successful transformation of a child into one of Dr. Trenton's creations. Loyal, despite everything, despite the transformation, despite the violation, Blue remained loyal. Loyal to what? To Dr. Trenton? To the other children? To some ideal of what friendship should be. The loyalty is both touching and tragic. A child clinging to some version of goodness, even after being turned into something monstrous. But monstrous. Blue is loyal and monstrous simultaneously. The transformation succeeded in creating something that looks like a monster, that probably acts like one in certain ways. But inside that monstrous form, there's still enough of the child to maintain loyalty, to remember what friendship means, to hold onto some vestige of humanity. Blue being first means Blue endured what the others didn't. The full force of experimentation, the trial and error, the refinement of Dr. Trenton's methods. Blue was the prototype, the proof of concept, the one whose transformation paved the way for all the others. And being first means Blue has been a rainbow friend longer than the others, has had more time to adjust or to forget, or to become fully what Dr. Trenton intended. Blue's loyalty might be genuine, or it might be programming, or it might be Stockholm Syndrome. The child identifying with their captor, because resistance is too painful to maintain. Black, the last kid, turned furious and attacked the doctor. Black, the final transformation, the last child Dr. Trenton converted into a rainbow friend, and Black turned furious, not just angry, furious, consumed by rage, unable or unwilling to suppress it, and that fury immediately directed itself at the right target. Black attacked the doctor. This is rebellion in its purest form, not planned resistance, not calculated revenge, but immediate violent reaction against the person responsible for the transformation. Black understood what had been done and responded with fury. Being the last is significant. Black saw what happened to the others, saw Blue's loyalty, saw the other rainbow friends in their transformed states. Black knew what was coming and was powerless to stop it. And when the transformation was complete, when Black became what the others had become, that knowledge and powerlessness erupted into violence. Did the attack succeed? Probably not. Dr. Trenton likely had safeguards, containment protocols, but the fact that Black tried, that even newly transformed Black had enough agency and fury to attack, tells us the transformations don't erase free will. They don't make the children compliant. They create beings that remember, that feel, that can choose violence. Nelson became red after betrayal by Trenton. Nelson, finally, a name. Not just a color designation, but an actual child's name. Nelson existed before becoming red. And what made Nelson into red was betrayal. Dr. Trenton betrayed Nelson specifically. Maybe Nelson trusted the doctor. Maybe Nelson volunteered, believing promises that were lies. Maybe Nelson thought they were special, chosen for something good. And then the transformation happened, and Nelson understood it was betrayal. Red, the color of anger, of blood, of warning. Nelson became red, carrying that betrayal as identity, as core truth. Red is rage embodied, is trust violated, is innocence destroyed. The betrayal makes Red's story particularly tragic. Blue was first, probably had no time to develop expectations. Black was last, saw it coming. But Nelson was somewhere in between, close enough to Dr. Trenton to feel personally betrayed, to understand that this wasn't just experimentation, it was personal violation. Red hides, fearing his own creations. And here's the twist. Red hides, not from Dr. Trenton, not from external threats. Red fears his own creations. What did Red create? We don't know the details, but we can infer. In the rage and pain of transformation, in the fury of betrayal, Red made something. Maybe other entities. Maybe manifestations of Red's anger. Maybe Red has the ability to create, inherited or stolen from Dr. Trenton's processes. And whatever Red created terrifies Red. Red made things that are too dangerous, too powerful, too out of control. Red hides from them, unable to unmake what was made, unable to control what was unleashed. This is the cycle continuing. Dr. Trenton created the Rainbow Friends and lost control. Red created something and lost control. The ability to create comes with consequences, with responsibilities the creators can't handle. Everyone who makes life becomes afraid of what they've made. Red hiding is also Red acknowledging danger, showing self-awareness and fear that suggests Red hasn't lost all humanity. Red knows when to run, when to hide, when to admit that something has gone too far. Teal bit a child due to social overload. Teal, another rainbow friend. And Teal's trigger for violence wasn't malice. It was overload. Social overload. Too much stimulation. Too many people. Too much interaction. Teal couldn't handle it and snapped. Bit a child. An action that probably came from panic more than aggression. From a nervous system pushed beyond its limits. This tells us the Rainbow Friends aren't just monsters. They have vulnerabilities, limits, breaking points. They can be overwhelmed, and when overwhelmed, they become dangerous not because they want to hurt, but because they can't control their responses. Teal biting a child is particularly horrifying because it shows how the cycle perpetuates. The Rainbow Friends, who were children themselves, who were victims, are now causing harm to other children. The trauma spreads. The violence continues. But Teal's actions stemming from overload also generates sympathy. Teal isn't evil. Teal is damaged, overstimulated, unable to cope with circumstances that shouldn't exist. The bite is tragedy, not villainy. Night 1, Night 2, Night 3. Now, we enter the operational phase. The Rainbow Friends hunt. But it's structured, gamified, night by night, with increasing complexity. Night 1. Collecting toys amid hunts. The objective is simple, but the danger is real. Someone, player, victim, new test subject, must collect toys while the Rainbow Friends hunt. Toys as objective creates bitter irony. These were children who played with toys. Now they're the obstacles to obtaining toys. Night 2. Purple chases for cotton candy. The hunts evolve. Now there's purple, distinguished from the others, with a specific trigger. Cotton candy. Something sweet, something associated with fairs and childhood joy, now used as lure or objective, while purple gives chase. Night 3. Keys against pink horde. Escalation. Now there's a horde, not individual Rainbow Friends, but pink in multitude. And the defense is keys, objects that lock and unlock, that represent access and imprisonment. The symbolism is heavy, using keys to survive against beings who were themselves locked into their transformations. The progression across nights suggests these are trials, tests, or perhaps a recurring nightmare that has to be survived repeatedly. Each night adds complexity, adds new rainbow friends with new behaviors, creates more desperate survival scenarios. Forest repairs bus amid odd world dangers. The setting expands. We're not just in a laboratory anymore. We're in a forest. And in this forest, there's a bus that needs repair. Odd world dangers. The phrase tells us this isn't a normal forest. Reality has become strange here, warped. The dangers aren't just the rainbow friends. They're environmental, atmospheric. The world itself becoming hostile or wrong. The bus represents escape, mobility, the potential to leave this nightmare. But it's broken, and someone has to repair it while surrounded by these odd world dangers, while the rainbow friends presumably continue their hunt. The forest could be where Dr. Trenton's facility was located, or it could be where the rainbow friends have spread to, claiming territory, making the natural world as wrong as they are. Either way, the forest is no refuge. If anything, it's more dangerous than the lab because it's less controlled, less predictable. Bus driver Norman joined the haunting crew. Norman, the bus driver, a normal person, presumably an adult, someone doing a regular job. And Norman joined the haunting crew. Joined, not captured, not transformed. Joined. Norman made a choice, or was corrupted, or was driven mad by what he witnessed. The bus driver became part of the horror instead of a victim or survivor. This is perhaps the most disturbing fact of all, because it suggests the Rainbow Friends' influence spreads beyond their physical transformations. They can convert others, bring them into the fold, turn normal people into haunters. Norman joining the crew means the boundary is permeable. You don't have to be transformed by Dr. Trenton to become part of the horror. You can choose it. Or maybe you can't choose. Maybe exposure to the Rainbow Friends changes you in ways that make joining inevitable. The bus driver specifically is tragic because Norman was the way out, the person who could drive victims to safety. But Norman became a threat instead. Another danger instead of deliverance. And so we understand now what happened to the children. Dr. Trenton transformed them into rainbow friends. Blue became loyal and monstrous. Black attacked in fury. Nelson was betrayed and became red, who created terrors and hides from them. Teal bit a child when overwhelmed. They hunt across nights with increasing complexity. They spread into forests and odd-world dangers. And they convert others, like Norman, into the haunting crew. This is the logical next step after the science we explored before. Once you can animate mascots, once you can transfer genomes and create life, the temptation to experiment on humans becomes irresistible, especially children, whose bodies and minds might be more adaptable, more malleable, easier to transform. But children carry something that mascots and birds don't. Memory, identity, the capacity for betrayal and rage and loyalty and fear. The Rainbow Friends aren't just created beings. They're traumatized children in monstrous forms, carrying their violations forward, acting out their pain on a world that failed to protect them. Dr. Trenton created monsters. But the real monstrosity is that these monsters remember being human, remember what was taken from them, and have to exist in forms they never chose with abilities they never wanted, forever caught between what they were and what they've become. The experiments on children show us that mascot horror isn't about supernatural evil. It's about human evil, about what we're willing to do to the vulnerable in pursuit of knowledge, profit, or power, about how violation creates cycles of violence that spread outward, converting even bus drivers into haunters. But we're not done yet, because individual transformations, as horrible as they are, pale in comparison to what comes next. Now we need to talk about what happens when the horror doesn't stay contained, when it breaks free and spreads, when transformation becomes infection, and the whole world becomes a hunting ground. Now, we need to talk about the outbreak. Individual horror is terrifying. A child transformed, a person violated. These are intimate nightmares that haunt our imaginations. But individual horror, as terrible as it is, remains contained. It has boundaries. It affects specific people in specific places. Now we move beyond individual transformation to something far worse. Infection. The horror that spreads. The violation that reproduces itself. The nightmare that consumes communities, societies, entire worlds. This is the outbreak. This is how Mascot horror becomes apocalyptic. Infection spread via Mr. P's potion 4 weeks pre-house. Mr. P, a name that sounds friendly, diminutive. Mr. P could run a store, teach a class, live next door. But Mr. P created a potion, and that potion spread infection for weeks before house. Already we're dealing with a timeline, a countdown. The infection has a known beginning point, a patient zero moment. For weeks ago, Mr. P's potion was released or leaked or used. And now, for weeks later, we're at house, wherever or whatever house is. For weeks for the infection to spread, to transform victims, to collapse whatever safety existed before. For weeks is long enough for exponential spread. If the infection passes person to person, for weeks allows multiple generations of transmission. If the infection has an incubation period, for weeks means many victims are already infected, already changing, already lost, even if they don't know it yet. But the potion was Mr. P's creation, which means Mr. P is responsible, intentionally or accidentally, for everything that follows. Every victim, every transformation, every piece of societal collapse traces back to this decision to create a potion that could infect. Mr. P created cyborg serum for his wife. And here's the motivation. Mr. P didn't create the potion for profit or curiosity or evil. Mr. P created it for love, for his wife. Someone Mr. P cared about enough to risk experimental science. Someone who was sick, probably, or injured, or dying. Someone Mr. P couldn't bear to lose. Cyborg serum. Not fully biological. Not fully mechanical. Something hybrid. Something that would blend organic and technological. Perhaps preserving life by replacing failing biological systems with artificial ones. The serum would save her by transforming her into something partially machine. This is the tragedy behind the outbreak. It started with love, with a person desperate to save someone they cared about, willing to try anything, to create anything, to ignore risks if there was even a chance of success. Mr. P probably knew the serum was dangerous, probably knew the testing wasn't complete, that the side effects weren't understood. But when someone you love is dying, caution becomes unbearable. You act, you try, you risk everything, because doing nothing is worse. And in trying to save one person, Mr. P doomed many. This is how outbreaks often begin. Not through malice, but through desperate love, through refusal to accept loss, through the conviction that science can solve what nature cannot. Doggy drank potion, smashing glass to infect. Doggy, the first victim, or the first vector. Either way, Doggy consumed the potion, drank it, not injected, not infected through contact, but drank, which suggests the potion was liquid, accessible, perhaps even tempting. Maybe it looked like something drinkable. Maybe Doggy was thirsty and the potion was available. Or maybe Doggy knew what it was and drank it anyway, for reasons we can't understand. And what happened? Doggy smashed glass. Violence. Destruction. The infection created immediate aggression. Doggy broke containment. Physically, through the smashing of glass, and metaphorically, through becoming the first infected entity capable of spreading the outbreak further. Smashing glass is significant, because glass represents barriers. Windows, containers, separation between inside and outside. Doggy breaking glass means nothing is contained anymore. The potion, the infection, the violence. It's all loose now, spreading beyond wherever it started. Did Doggy infect others through the smashing? Through wounds from the broken glass? Through proximity? We don't know the exact mechanism, but we know this was the beginning of spread. Doggy drank and smashed and infected. One became many. The outbreak began. Bunny family turned first. Georgie survived. The bunny family, a family, not isolated individuals, but a connected group, people who loved each other, lived together, shared their lives. And they turned first, before other families, before the general population. The bunny family was infected and transformed. Maybe because they were close to Mr. P. Maybe because they lived near where the potion was created or stored. Maybe just bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. Turning implies transformation, becoming something other than what they were. The infection doesn't just kill, it changes. The bunny family members are still there, in some sense, but they're not themselves anymore. They're infected, they're turned, they're lost. Except for Georgie. Georgie survived. Alone among the bunny family, Georgie avoided infection, avoided transformation, remained human while everyone else turned. Imagine that perspective. Watching your family change, knowing you're the only one left unchanged, being surrounded by people who look familiar but aren't really your family anymore. Georgie's survival is simultaneously fortunate and traumatic. Georgie gets to live, but at the cost of being the sole witness to the family's destruction. Georgie Piggy vanished pre-infection. Wait, Georgie Piggy, not Georgie Bunny. Are these the same Georgie, or different characters? The names suggest different entities, but the timing is suspicious. Georgie Piggy vanished before the infection, before all of this happened, before Mr. P's potion spread. Georgie Piggy was already gone, disappeared, missing. This raises questions. Was Georgie Piggy's vanishing related to the potion? Was Georgie Piggy the reason Mr. P created the serum, trying to bring back or save someone who had already vanished? Or is the vanishing purely coincidental, a separate tragedy that happened to precede the outbreak? The vanishing might explain Mr. P's desperation. If Georgie Piggy was connected to Mr. P or his wife, if Georgie Piggy's disappearance was traumatic, it might have contributed to the emotional state that led to creating dangerous serums, to taking risks that should never have been taken. Or maybe Georgie Piggy vanished because of early experiments. Maybe Georgie Piggy was a test subject, and the vanishing was actually transformation or death or escape. Maybe Georgie Piggy is out there somewhere, changed, hiding, becoming something else. Huggy and friends hid from outbreak. Huggy and friends, survivors, people who recognized the danger and went into hiding. Hiding is the rational response to outbreak. When infection spreads and there's no cure, no defense, no way to fight back, you hide. You find somewhere safe, and you stay there and you hope the outbreak passes you by. But hiding has costs. You're separated from others. You don't know what's happening beyond your hiding place. You run out of supplies. You've faced the constant stress of wondering if you're truly safe, or if the infection will find you anyway. Huggy and friends at least have each other. They're not hiding alone. There's companionship, mutual support, shared burden. But there's also conflict. The stress of hiding tests relationships, creates tensions, forces groups to make difficult decisions about rationing, risk, whether to stay hidden or venture out. And hiding is temporary. Eventually, supplies run out. Eventually, you have to move or act or emerge. Hiding buys time, but it doesn't solve anything. Huggy and friends are delaying the inevitable, surviving day by day, knowing that hiding can't last forever. Player escapes forest alone post-doggy chase. Now we shift to player, someone experiencing the outbreak, running from danger, specifically fleeing from Doggy, the first infected, the glass smasher, now a pursuer. The player escapes. Survival, at least temporarily, but escapes alone. Whatever group the player was with is gone. Dead, infected, separated. The player made it out, but everyone else didn't. Post-doggy chase, means direct confrontation with the infected. The player has seen what the infection does, has run from an infected entity, has experienced the horror firsthand. This isn't distant observation. This is personal survival. And the escape happens in a forest. The same forest from the Rainbow Friends segment? Perhaps. Forests appear repeatedly in Mascot horror. These liminal natural spaces that should be safe but become hunting grounds. Places where civilized rules don't apply and survival requires different instincts. The player escaping alone also sets up the role. The player is who we follow, who we experience the outbreak through. The player's survival, the player's decisions, the player's journey through the infected world. That's our lens into this horror. Walkie-talkie aids after forest flee. But the player isn't entirely alone. After fleeing the forest, the player finds a walkie-talkie, or someone gives the player a walkie-talkie. Either way, communication is restored. Walkie-talkies represent connection across distance. Someone else is out there, transmitting, receiving, providing guidance or information or companionship. The player can hear another voice, can report status, can coordinate with others who are also surviving. This aid is crucial because it prevents total isolation. The outbreak hasn't destroyed all infrastructure, all human connection. There are still pockets of survivors, still networks functioning, still hope that coordination might lead to something better than individual survival. But walkie-talkies also have limitations. You can only talk to whoever's in range. You don't know if the person on the other end is trustworthy. You don't know if they're infected, if they're leading you into a trap, if they'll be there when you arrive wherever they tell you to go. The walkie-talkie aids the player after the forest flee, but it also creates dependency, creates a voice that the player might follow even when that voice might be leading toward danger. Safe place shelters survivors briefly. Safe place. Even the name indicates temporary refuge. Not safe home, not safe haven, just safe place. A location that provides shelter, that protects from immediate danger, but that everyone knows won't last. Shelters survivors briefly. The survivors gather. They find each other, pool resources, create temporary community. For a little while, there's safety. For a little while, the outbreak is held at bay. For a little while, people can rest, plan, hope, but only briefly. Safe place isn't permanent. Maybe the supplies run out. Maybe the infected find it. Maybe the structure itself fails. Whatever the reason, safe place can't protect forever. It's a pause, not a solution. The brevity of safety creates urgency. While at safe place, the survivors have to decide what's next. Do they fortify and try to make it last longer? Do they use it as a staging ground to search for a better location? Do they gather supplies and move on before the brief safety ends? And the community that forms at safe place is fragile. People thrown together by crisis, not by choice. Tensions arise. Resources create conflict. Fear undermines trust. The survivors might be safer from the infection while at safe place, but they're not safe from each other. Player confronts Mr. P at outpost. The confrontation. Finally, the player faces Mr. P at an outpost, another temporary location, a place on the periphery, a point of interface between safe zones and danger zones. This confrontation is loaded with meaning. Mr. P created the potion that started the outbreak. Mr. P is responsible, directly or indirectly, for everything that's happened. And now the player, who has survived the forest and doggy and loss and flight, comes face to face with the source. What does the confrontation involve? Accusations? Violence? Does the player attack Mr. P? Does Mr. P explain, justify, apologize? Or does Mr. P reveal information the player needs, despite the moral culpability? Mr. P at an outpost suggests Mr. P is still active, still operating, still involved in the situation. Mr. P hasn't hidden or fled or succumbed to despair. Mr. P is at an outpost, which implies Mr. P has a purpose, a plan, something Mr. P is still trying to accomplish. Maybe Mr. P is trying to fix what was broken. Maybe Mr. P is creating a cure. Or maybe Mr. P is continuing the experiments, still trying to save the wife, still pursuing the original goal, regardless of the cost. Pony and Zizzy fight soldiers at plant. The outbreak expands. Military or security forces are involved now. Soldiers at a plant. And resistance emerges. Pony and Zizzy fighting against these soldiers. Pony and Zizzy, named characters, individuals with agency and capability. They're not just surviving. They're fighting. They're taking action against the soldiers, which raises questions about the soldiers' role. Are the soldiers trying to contain the outbreak? Are they protecting the plant from the infected? Or are they part of the problem? Enforcing quarantine that traps innocents, preventing escape, serving interests that prioritize containment over salvation? The plant setting is significant. Plants usually mean infrastructure, power plants, water treatment, manufacturing. The soldiers fighting at a plant suggests this location is strategic, important enough to defend or control. Maybe the plant creates or stores something necessary for survival. Maybe it's where Mr. P's serum was produced. Maybe it holds the key to understanding or stopping the outbreak. Pony and Zizzy fighting the soldiers means there's conflict beyond just infected versus survivors. There are factions, competing agendas, humans fighting humans, while the infection spreads around them. Georgie joins player against cyborg Mr. P. Georgie survived. Georgie Bunny or Georgie Piggy, whichever Georgie this is, now joins the player. Alliance forms. Two survivors working together. Against cyborg Mr. P. Mr. P used the serum. Maybe on himself. Maybe the serum that was meant to save Mr. P's wife ended up transforming Mr. P instead. Cyborg Mr. P suggests partial infection, partial transformation. Mr. P is neither fully human nor fully infected. Mr. P exists in between a hybrid, a being that proves the serum works but at a terrible cost. Georgie and the player working together against Mr. P creates moral complexity. Mr. P isn't a simple villain. Mr. P tried to save someone loved, failed, became a victim of the serum's effects. But Mr. P also created the outbreak, made choices that doomed others. Does defeating cyborg Mr. P stop the outbreak? Does it matter at this point, with so many already infected? Or is this just about survival, about eliminating a specific threat, about Georgie and the player doing what they need to do to continue existing? Lab holds final infection source. The lab, where it all started, presumably, where Mr. P created the serum, where the experiments happened, where the infection originated. And the lab holds the final infection source. Not all the infection. Much of it has spread beyond containment. But the source, the remaining serum, perhaps, the equipment that produces it, the research that could be used to create more, the knowledge that makes everything possible. Finding the lab is crucial. If you can destroy the source, you can prevent new outbreaks, even if you can't cure the current one. If you can understand the source, maybe you can develop a cure, a counteragent, a way to stop the infection's progress. But the lab also represents danger. It's the epicenter. It might still contain infected test subjects, dangerous experiments, unstable materials. Entering the lab means confronting the origin of all this horror, seeing where it began, understanding exactly what Mr. P did. The lab holds final answers about why the outbreak happened, about whether it can be stopped, about what comes next. Temple reveals cult infection roots. Temple, a religious building, a place of worship, and it reveals something crucial: cult infection roots. The infection isn't purely scientific. There's a cult involved, a group with beliefs, rituals, purposes that go beyond Mr. P's personal tragedy. The cult used the infection or enabled it or perhaps created it, and Mr. P unknowingly tapped into something the cult had already prepared. Cult infection roots suggest intentionality. The outbreak isn't just an accident. It's part of a plan, a ritual, a larger purpose that the cult is serving. Maybe the cult worships the infection. Maybe the cult sees transformation as transcendence. Maybe the cult wants to remake the world through infection. The temple revealing these roots means the temple holds evidence, documentation, artifacts that explain the cult's involvement. Maybe the cult used the temple as a base. Maybe they performed rituals there. Maybe the temple itself is infected, corrupted, transformed into a place of darkness. Understanding the cult's role reframes everything. The outbreak isn't random. It's designed. And if it's designed, it might be controllable, or it might be even more dangerous than anyone realized. Camp tests alliances amid infected. Camp, another gathering place, another attempt at community. And at this camp, alliances are tested. Amid infected, the infected are present nearby, a constant threat. Decisions made at camp happen under pressure, with danger close, with no guarantee that any alliance will survive the next attack. Testing alliances means conflict, competing interests, difficult choices. Who gets supplies? Who takes the dangerous assignments? Who do you trust? When resources are scarce and danger is constant, even close allies can fracture. The camp might be where survivors gather between actions, where they plan, where they recover. But it's not safe. The infected are amid the camp, which could mean infiltration or proximity, or perhaps some survivors are already infected and hiding it. Testing alliances also means forming new ones. Strangers have to learn to work together. Previous enemies might need to cooperate. The camp becomes a crucible where relationships are forged or broken based on survival necessity. Book 2 starts in Allie's post-plant. Book 2, a new chapter. The story continues, expands, moves into a second phase. Starting in alleys, urban settings now, narrow passages between buildings, places where the infected can trap you, where escape routes are limited. The setting has shifted from forests and labs to cities, to areas where human civilization is still visible but degraded. Post-plant, after the events at the plant, after the fight with soldiers, after whatever happened there was resolved or failed. The survivors have moved on, are dealing with the aftermath, are navigating what comes next. Book 2 implies the outbreak has evolved. It's not the initial chaos anymore. It's become ongoing reality. Survivors have adapted, developed strategies, learned to live in a world where infection is constant. The story shifts from outbreak survival to post-outbreak existence. Refinery hides Zizzy's fate clues. Refinery, industrial setting, place where raw materials are processed, transformed, refined. And somewhere in this refinery are clues about Zizzy's fate. Zizzy, who fought soldiers at the plant with Pony. What happened to Zizzy? The fact that fate must be uncovered through clues suggests Zizzy didn't simply die or survive obviously. Zizzy's fate is uncertain, hidden, something that requires investigation. The refinery hiding these clues might mean Zizzy went there, or was taken there, or left evidence there. Maybe Zizzy is still in the refinery, transformed, trapped, waiting. Maybe the clues reveal Zizzy's death. Maybe they reveal something worse. For the player and other survivors, finding these clues is crucial. Zizzy was an ally, someone who fought beside them. Understanding what happened to Zizzy means understanding the danger better, means knowing what risks are real, means getting closure or motivation to continue. Ship chapter sinks hopes of cure. Ship, they're on water now, or trying to escape by water, or searching a ship for something crucial. And the ship chapter sinks hopes of cure. The survivors have been hoping, believing that somewhere a cure exists, that the infection can be stopped or reversed. The ship was supposed to provide answers, or transport them somewhere safe, or hold medical supplies that could make a difference. But the ship sinks that hope. Maybe literally, the ship sinks, taking potential cure materials with it. Maybe metaphorically. What they find on the ship proves the cure doesn't exist, can't work, or was destroyed. Hope sinking is devastating. When you survive on the belief that things can get better, that the nightmare has an end, losing that belief transforms everything. Survival without hope becomes just postponing the inevitable. The survivors have to find new motivations, new reasons to continue. The ship chapter likely also involves literal danger. Ship disasters, sinking, drowning, being trapped on failing vessels. The sinking of hope parallels the sinking of the ship, physical and emotional disaster combined. Player chooses safe or destroyer paths. Finally, a choice. The player, our lens into the outbreak, must decide between two paths. Safe path, prioritize survival, protection, maintaining what little safety exists. The safe path preserves but doesn't solve. It's about staying alive without taking risks that might lead to victory or disaster. Destroyer path, take action, fight back, destroy the infection or the systems that enable it. The destroyer path risks everything for the possibility of ending the outbreak, even knowing that failure means losing whatever safety remains. This choice likely determines the ending, the outcome, what the outbreak becomes. Does the player choose preservation or destruction? Does the player protect the few who remain, or risk them all for a chance at stopping the infection completely? Either choice has costs. The safe path might doom humanity to endless survival in a world of infection. The destroyer path might sacrifice the last survivors in a failed attempt at redemption. The player chooses, and that choice echoes beyond the individual, shapes the world, determines whether the outbreak remains eternal or ends, one way or another. And so, we've tracked the outbreak from Mr. P's desperate attempt to save his wife, through to the player's choice between safety and destruction. We've seen infection spread through Doggy's violence, watched the bunny family turn, followed Georgie's survival, tracked the player's journey through forests and safe places and confrontations. We've witnessed the collapse of society into outposts and camps, seen alliances tested, watched hopes sink with ships. We've discovered labs and temples, refineries and plants, each location revealing more about the outbreak's nature and the factions fighting around it. This is what happens when horror spreads, when individual transformation becomes infectious disease, when love and desperation create catastrophe, when the world breaks down under the weight of corruption that can't be contained. The infection has spread, the society has collapsed, and we're left with survivors making impossible choices, trying to find meaning in a world where cure has been proven impossible and safety is always temporary. But the outbreak, as terrible as it is still somewhat comprehensible. It follows disease logic, spreads through contact, operates on biological principles we can understand even if we can't control them. Now we need to look at something that breaks those rules, something that was built on darkness from the beginning, that never pretended to be anything but corrupted, something that exists in the ruins of innocence and calls those ruins home. Now we need to examine the corporate abyss, the kindergarten built on ruins, the tragedy that happened when business and horror merged completely. We've seen love create disaster. We've watched infection spread and collapse society. We've witnessed children transformed and outbreaks consuming the world. But now we descend into something perhaps even darker. Not horror that emerges accidentally, not catastrophe born from good intentions gone wrong, but horror that's foundational, built into the structure from the very beginning. Welcome to Banban's kindergarten, where the ruins came first and the business was built on top of them, where tragedy isn't a consequence, but a precondition, where every bright color and cheerful mascot conceals something that was always meant to be dark. This is corporate horror in its purest form. This is the abyss. Banban's kindergarten was built on the ruins of a prior facility. Built on ruins, not built from scratch, not constructed on clear land with fresh purposes. Built on top of something else, something that already failed, already collapsed, already became ruins. A prior facility. What was it before? Another kindergarten? A research lab? Something connected to the experiments we've been discussing? The fact that it's ruins means it ended badly, means something terrible happened there. And instead of investigating the ruins, instead of understanding why the prior facility failed, instead of treating the site as cursed or contaminated, someone looked at those ruins and thought, this is where we should build a kindergarten, a place for children. This foundational decision taints everything. You can't build something good on ruins without the ruins affecting what you build. The darkness from below seeps up. The failures of the past influence the present. The kindergarten might look cheerful and new, but underneath, always underneath, are the ruins of what came before. Josh's parents founded the kindergarten to revive their dead son. And here's the purpose. The motivation that explains why someone would build a kindergarten on cursed ruins. Josh's parents, bereaved parents, a mother and father who lost their child, who buried or cremated or mourned Josh, who should have moved on but couldn't, founded the kindergarten to revive their dead son, not to honor his memory, not to prevent other parents from experiencing similar loss, to literally bring Josh back, to reverse death, to resurrect. This is the same impulse we've seen before. Refusing to accept loss, believing that science or money or determination can overcome death. Josh's parents had resources, enough to found a kindergarten, enough to pursue resurrection, and they used those resources not to heal, but to refuse reality. The kindergarten becomes a tool for their obsession. Maybe they believe proximity to many children will somehow help. Maybe the prior facility's ruins contain knowledge or materials useful for resurrection. Maybe they're using the kindergarten as a cover for experiments that would be illegal or impossible to conduct overtly. Either way, every child who attends this kindergarten is being used. Their parents think they're getting quality child care or education. But really, those children are resources in Josh's parents' attempt to bring their son back from death. A ball pit collapse killed dozens during Bring a Friend Day, and then tragedy strikes, not gradually, not through accumulated failures, catastrophically. A ball pit, children's play equipment, colorful plastic balls that should be harmless, fun, exactly the kind of thing kindergartners enjoy. But this ball pit collapses, killed dozens, not injured, killed dozens of children dead, all at once, in a preventable disaster during what should have been a celebration. Bring a Friend Day, an event designed to encourage attendance, to let current students invite others, to grow the kindergarten's population. An open house, essentially, which means the victims weren't just regular students but also visitors, guests, children who were there for the first time, brought by friends, brought by the kindergarten's invitation. How does a ball pit kill dozens? The collapse must have been structural, catastrophic. Maybe the floor beneath gave way. Maybe the walls crushed inward. Maybe children were buried, suffocated, trapped under weight that should never have been there. And the dozens dead, those are just the immediate deaths. Others might have been injured, traumatized, permanently damaged by witnessing or experiencing the collapse. The families destroyed, the community devastated. This is the moment when the kindergarten's foundation in ruins becomes literally manifest. The prior facility's failures, the darkness beneath, the cursed ground, all of it erupts during Bring a Friend Day and consumes the children it was supposedly meant to serve. Zulfius awoke in the abyss after the tragedy. Zulfius, a name we haven't heard before, and Zulfius awoke, not survived not was rescued, awoke, as if from sleep, as if Zulfius had been dormant and the tragedy activated something. In the abyss, the space beneath the kindergarten, the ruins under the ruins. The abyss is where things fall, where light doesn't reach, where the darkness from the prior facility remains. After the tragedy, the ball pit collapse served a purpose, perhaps. It opened something, created a connection, allowed Zulfius to wake. Maybe Zulfius is connected to the prior facility. Maybe Zulfius is why the prior facility became ruins in the first place. Maybe Zulfius has been waiting dormant for enough death to occur above to justify awakening below. Zulfius waking in the abyss suggests consciousness, awareness. Zulfius isn't an object or a location, but an entity, something alive or alive adjacent, or conscious in ways we can't fully comprehend. And now Zulfius is awake. Now Zulfius can act. Now Zulfius becomes a force in the kindergarten's ongoing horror. Banban mutated into a hellish form post-collapse. Banban, the kindergarten's namesake, presumably the main mascot, the character children were supposed to love, the face of the brand, mutated, changed form, transformed from whatever Banban was before into something different. The mutation happened post-collapse, meaning the ball pit tragedy triggered it or enabled it, into a hellish form. Not just changed, but corrupted. Hellish suggests demonic, torturous, a form designed to inspire fear rather than comfort. Banban's new form is wrong, is violation, is everything a kindergarten mascot shouldn't be. What did Banban look like before? Probably friendly, cute, safe. The kind of character that would appeal to young children, that parents would trust. But post-collapse, post-tragedy, post-dozens of deaths, Banban became something else. Maybe the grief and horror warped Banban. Maybe Banban absorbed the deaths, incorporated the tragedy into its form. Maybe Banban was always going to mutate, and the collapse just accelerated the timeline. Banban in hellish form is the perfect symbol for the kindergarten. Something that looks like it should help children, should protect them, should make them happy, transformed into a thing that does the opposite. It shows maternal instincts toward childlike figures. It, not he or she, it. Banban in hellish form has transcended or lost gender, become pure entity, pure function. Shows maternal instincts. Despite the mutation, despite the hellish form, Banban retains or develops behaviors associated with mothering, protection, nurturing, care. Banban wants to take care of things, toward childlike figures, not actual children necessarily, but things that resemble children. Other mascots, perhaps, small entities, vulnerable creatures. Banban's maternal instincts aren't directed at the kindergarten students, but at other elements of the horror itself. This creates deeply unsettling dynamics. Banban in hellish form, nurturing other abominations. Banban protecting creatures that should be destroyed. Banban showing care through methods that would terrify rather than comfort. The maternal instincts might be sincere. Banban might genuinely believe it's helping, protecting, mothering these childlike figures. Or the instincts might be corrupted, a mockery of motherhood, where care equals imprisonment and protection means preventing growth or escape. Either way, Banban's maternal behavior makes it more dangerous. A simple monster you can flee or fight, but a monster that believes it's protecting things, that acts from instinct rather than malice, that genuinely thinks its actions are care. That's harder to predict, harder to resist, harder to defeat. Queen Banelia appears painted on walls with jump as you. Queen Banelia, another entity, a queen, suggesting hierarchy, power, rulership. And Banelia's presence is through painting, through artistic representation rather than physical form. Appears painted on walls, not hidden, but displayed. The walls of the kindergarten are decorated with Queen Banelia's image. Children saw these paintings every day. Maybe before the collapse, Queen Banelia looked friendly, part of the kindergarten's mascot family. But after, the paintings take on different meaning. With jump as you, unclear grammar that makes the phrase more disturbing. Jump as you. As you what? As you are? As you can. The instruction is incomplete, ambiguous, unfinished. Maybe that's intentional. Maybe the incompleteness is part of the message. Jump could mean many things. Jump for joy. Jump to escape. Jump into the abyss. Jump before you're pushed. The painted Queen Banelia, offering this cryptic instruction, creates an atmosphere of coded messages, of meaning that's just beyond comprehension, of guidance that might be helpful or harmful, depending on interpretation. The walls themselves become communication medium. Queen Banelia isn't present physically, but her image and her message are everywhere, inescapable, constant. You can't attend the kindergarten without encountering Queen Banelia, without processing her incomplete instruction, without wondering what it means and whether you should follow it. Disobedience plasters hide buttons in secret rooms. Disobedience plasters, physical objects or markings that indicate where disobedience occurred or is occurring. They're scattered through the kindergarten, marking transgression, recording resistance. Hide buttons, mechanisms that conceal, that make things invisible or inaccessible. Buttons that, when pressed, activate hiding functions. In secret rooms, spaces within the kindergarten that aren't on official maps, that parents don't see during tours, that exist between or beneath the official structure. These secret rooms were always part of the design, always meant to be hidden. The disobedience plaster's hiding buttons suggests that resistance is built into the structure. The kindergarten wants obedience, but provides mechanisms for disobedience, as if testing who will find them, who will use them, who will resist even when resistance seems impossible. Finding these secret rooms and their buttons might offer escape or deeper imprisonment. Maybe the buttons open exits. Maybe they open further secrets. Maybe pressing them alerts something that's been waiting for someone to disobey. The very existence of secret rooms in a kindergarten is violation. Parents trust that their children are in safe, monitored spaces. But the secret rooms prove that trust is misplaced, that the kindergarten has purposes beyond what's advertised, that children are being exposed to things hidden from parental knowledge. The end is nigh. Message boards taught children lessons. Message boards, educational tools, boards where teachers write lessons, where children learn letters and numbers and basic concepts. But these message boards taught lessons about the end. The end is nigh. Apocalyptic messaging. The lesson isn't math or reading. It's fatalism, doom, the conviction that conclusion approaches. Teaching children, this is profound psychological manipulation. Children absorb what they're taught, believe what adults tell them. If the kindergarten's message boards consistently communicate that the end is approaching, children internalize that belief. They grow up thinking catastrophe is inevitable, that hope is pointless, that the world is ending. This might be preparation. Maybe the kindergarten knows something, has information about actual approaching doom. Or maybe it's conditioning, making children accept horror as normal, training them not to question or resist when the next tragedy occurs. The message boards also suggest ongoing operation. Even after the ball pit collapse, the kindergarten continues teaching. Children still attend. Lessons still happen. And those lessons now include apocalyptic messaging alongside traditional education. Whistles echo from the abyss, luring victims. Whistles, simple sounds, the kind teachers use to get children's attention, to signal transitions, to organize activities. Echoing from the abyss, rising from below, from the ruins under the kindergarten, from where Zulfius awoke. The whistles aren't coming from teachers or staff. They're coming from something deeper, luring victims, The whistles have purpose. They're designed to attract, to draw people closer, to make victims approach the source. Like a predator mimicking prey sounds, the whistles use familiar audio to create false safety. Children especially would respond to whistles. It's a sound they're trained to obey, to pay attention to approach. The whistles from the Abyss exploit that training, use it to pull children toward danger instead of safety. What happens when victims follow the whistles? Do they fall into the abyss? Do they encounter Zulfius? Do they become part of whatever's happening beneath the kindergarten? The echo quality also creates disorientation. Echoes make it hard to locate the source, to determine distance or direction. Victims following the whistles might wander the kindergarten, getting lost, descending into areas they shouldn't enter, always pursuing the sound that seems to come from just ahead, just around the next corner, just down the next stairwell. Jumbo Josh hides kids during hide-and-seek games. Jumbo Josh, another mascot character. Jumbo suggests size, largeness, something imposing. And Josh, the same name as the dead son Josh's parents tried to revive. Is Jumbo Josh meant to be Josh, a mascot version of the child who died, created as an attempt to keep Josh present in the kindergarten built to resurrect him? Hides kids, an action that could be protective or predatory. Hiding kids during hide-and-seek sounds like normal play, but in the context of Banban's kindergarten, normal play becomes sinister. During hide-and-seek games, a classic children's game, someone counts, others hide. The seeker tries to find the hiders. But when Jumbo Josh is involved, when the game happens in a kindergarten built on ruins where dozens died and where whistles lure victims to the abyss, hide-and-seek becomes something else. Does Jumbo Josh hide kids to protect them from the whistles, from the abyss, from other dangers in the kindergarten? Or does Jumbo Josh hide kids to prevent them from being found, to keep them for purposes we can't see? The hiding could be permanent. Kids go to hide, Jumbo Josh helps, and they never emerge. They're hidden so, well, they can't be found, not by seekers, not by parents, not by search parties. Jumbo Josh's help in the game becomes abduction disguised as play. Meta-acknowledgement of creators. And finally, we step outside the narrative briefly to acknowledge. Euphoric Brothers craft Banban chaos. Jumbo Bosch details hidden truths. These are the creators, the people who built this narrative universe, who designed Banban's kindergarten, who decided what horrors would populate it and how those horrors would function. Euphoric Brothers crafting chaos is almost ironic. Euphoria, extreme happiness, combined with creating chaos, with building systems of horror. Maybe they find euphoria in chaos. Maybe the name is commentary on the creative process, on finding joy in building things that disturb. Jumbo Bosch detailing hidden truths suggests ongoing revelation, ongoing discovery. The truths aren't obvious. They're hidden. And Jumbo Bosch, possibly a player, possibly a content creator, possibly part of the development team, works to uncover them, to make them visible, to document the kindergarten secrets. This meta layer reminds us that someone designed this horror. Someone decided a kindergarten should be built on ruins, that a ball pit should collapse killing dozens, that Banban should mutate, that whistles should lure victims. These aren't accidents. They're intentional creative decisions. And acknowledging the creators is both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it reminds us this is fiction, is designed, is controllable. Unsettling because it means people thought about these scenarios, imagined them in detail, chose to share them with audiences. The creators exist in the meta layer we discussed earlier, the space where theories bind fans together, where timelines span books endlessly. The creators feed that space, provide content for it, shape how the community engages with mascot horror. And so we've descended fully into the corporate abyss of Banban's kindergarten. We've seen a business built on ruins for the impossible purpose of resurrecting a dead child. We've witnessed the catastrophic ball pit collapse that killed dozens. We've met Zulfius waking in the abyss and Banban mutating into hellish maternal form. We've encountered Queen Banelia painted on walls with incomplete instructions. We've discovered secret rooms with disobedience plasters hiding buttons. We've absorbed the lessons that the end is nigh. We've heard whistles luring victims and watched Jumbo Josh hide children during games that might not end. And we've acknowledged the creators who built this horror, who continue to detail hidden truths, who craft chaos with what might be euphoria. Banban's kindergarten represents corporate horror at its most fundamental. Not a good company that made mistakes, not a business that accidentally created darkness, but an enterprise that was always wrong, always built on failure, always pursuing impossible goals through methods guaranteed to create tragedy. Josh's parents couldn't accept their son's death, so they built a kindergarten on cursed ground and doomed dozens of other children in the process. The mascots mutated, the abyss awakened, and now the kindergarten operates in a state of permanent horror, teaching apocalyptic lessons, luring victims with whistles, hiding children who may never be found. This is what happens when grief meets capitalism, when resurrection becomes a business plan, when the refusal to accept loss creates infrastructure designed to perpetuate horror. The kindergarten doesn't just house darkness. It is darkness, given corporate form, given educational veneer, given bright colors and mascot characters to make it seem acceptable. But we've seen beneath those colors now. We've looked into the abyss. We've understood that sometimes horror isn't created through error or infection or transformation. Sometimes it's built from the foundation up, deliberately constructed, corporately organized. And that kind of horror, the kind that's systematic, institutional, built into the business model, that might be the hardest kind to escape, because you can't cure it or contain it or wait it out. It will always be there, operating, pursuing its impossible goals, consuming whatever resources and people are available, growing through the ruins it creates. The abyss isn't empty. It never was. And now we know what lives there. We've explored corporate horror, science gone wrong, businesses that consume children. But now we move beyond what can be explained by greed and experimentation. Now we enter territory where the rational ends and something else begins. This is the realm of rituals, of cults, of supernatural corruption that predates the corporations, that exists beneath them, that perhaps even guides them from the shadows. These are the stories where mascot horror touches the truly occult, where children's entertainment becomes a vessel for forces that shouldn't exist in our reality. Let's descend into the supernatural darkness. Riley uncovers Hameln's tape curse. Riley, an investigator, we can assume, someone looking for answers, someone who found more than they bargained for when they uncovered tapes related to Hameln. Hameln, the name immediately evokes the Pied Piper of Hamelin, that old German legend about a musician who lured children away, never to return. And here, in mascot horror, we have tapes bearing that name. Not just videos, but cursed tapes. The concept of a cursed tape feels almost quaint now, a relic of analog horror from decades past. But there's something uniquely unsettling about physical media carrying a curse. Digital files can be deleted, corrupted, wiped. But tapes persist. They sit in boxes, in storage units, in attics. They wait. And when someone like Riley finds them, when curiosity compels them to play what should have remained unwatched, the curse activates. What makes these tapes cursed? Perhaps they contain footage of something that shouldn't be witnessed. Perhaps the act of watching creates a connection, a vulnerability. Perhaps the tapes themselves are ritually prepared objects, encoded not just with video and audio, but with intent, with malevolence, with something that can reach through the screen and into the viewer's mind. Riley uncovered these tapes, which suggests they were hidden. Someone buried them, archived them, marked them as classified, or destroyed them in records while keeping them in secret. The uncovering is an act of transgression. Riley went where they weren't supposed to go, accessed what they weren't supposed to access. And now Riley knows. Now Riley has seen what's on the tapes, and that knowledge, that viewing, has consequences, because curses don't need to be believed in to work. They just need to be activated. Riley probably approached the tapes with skepticism, with academic interest, with the confidence of someone who doesn't believe in supernatural nonsense. But the tapes don't care what Riley believes. The curse is already spreading. Charles' cult eggs spawn trains. Now, we encounter something explicitly cultic. Charles, a cult, and their method of propagation. Eggs that spawn trains. Let's unpack this strange, surreal imagery. Eggs represent potential birth, new life. They're symbols of creation, of things waiting to emerge. But these aren't ordinary eggs. They're cult eggs, which means they're ritually prepared, blessed or cursed by whatever entity the cult serves. And what do these eggs spawn? Trains. Not living creatures, but vehicles, mechanical constructs. The collision of the organic eggs with the mechanical trains creates a kind of impossible biology, a nightmare logic, where the categories we use to understand reality break down. Trains in horror carry their own weight. They're powerful, unstoppable once in motion, bound to tracks they cannot deviate from. They carry passengers to destinations, but those destinations aren't always chosen by the passengers themselves. Trains as cult objects suggest a kind of inevitable movement, a journey that must be completed whether you want to take it or not. The Charles cult uses these eggs, these impossible birth objects, to spread their influence. Each egg is a seed, and when it hatches, when it spawns, it creates not a creature but a vehicle for the cult's purposes. Perhaps the trains carry new recruits. Perhaps they transport materials for rituals. Perhaps the trains themselves are the ritual, endlessly circling on tracks that form occult patterns when viewed from above. Cults need mechanisms to grow, to spread, to perpetuate themselves. The Charles cult has found a deeply weird method. Biological vehicles, eggs that birth trains. It's the kind of detail that makes Mascot horror so unsettling. It takes the impossible and presents it matter-of-factly, as if this is just how things work in this reality. And perhaps it is. Perhaps in the world where mascots come alive and corporations experiment on children, eggs spawning trains is simply another fact of existence, another horror to be catalogued and survived. Rambley the raccoon hides park secrets. Rambley, a raccoon mascot. Raccoons are clever, adaptable, known for their dexterity and their habit of finding their way into places they shouldn't be. Rambley fits this archetype, but with a twist. He's not breaking in to steal. He's hiding something. Park secrets. Every theme park has secrets. Hidden tunnels for staff. Maintenance areas tourists never see. The infrastructure behind the magic. But the secrets Rambley hides are different. These are secrets that need hiding. Secrets that would destroy the park if they were revealed. Secrets that perhaps predate the park itself. Rambley is the keeper of these secrets. Whether he chose this role or was assigned it, whether he hides them willingly or is compelled to, we don't know. But Rambley knows things about what's buried beneath the park, about what happens in the tunnels after closing, about why certain attractions were shut down, why certain areas are marked as under renovation year after year. There's something deeply unsettling about a mascot serving as a secret keeper. Mascots are supposed to be transparent, one-dimensional. They smile, they wave, they pose for photos. They're not supposed to have hidden depths, interior lives, knowledge they refuse to share. But Rambley does. Maybe the secrets are protective. Maybe Rambley hides them because revealing them would cause panic, would shut down the park, would destroy the illusion that keeps people coming back. Or maybe the secrets are darker. Maybe Rambley hides them because the truth is too terrible to speak, because some knowledge poisons everyone who knows it. The question becomes, should we trust Rambley? Is he hiding secrets to protect us, or to protect something else? And what would it take for Rambley to reveal what he knows? What pressure point could we find that would make the raccoon finally speak the truths he's been hiding? Wooly warns in Adventurer Tapes. Wooly, another mascot, but this one takes a different approach. Wooly doesn't hide. Wooly warns. Adventurer Tapes. The phrase suggests educational content, maybe a children's series about exploration and discovery. Wooly appears in these tapes, and instead of playing along with the adventure narrative, instead of encouraging children to explore and learn, Wooly issues warnings. This creates an immediate tension. The tapes are supposed to be about adventure, about going forth into the unknown. But Wooly, who should be the cheerful guide, the supportive companion, is instead trying to stop the adventure before it begins. Warning against what? Against the very premise of the tapes themselves, probably. Against following the instructions. Against trusting the narrator. Against believing that this is a safe, educational experience. Wooly's warnings suggest that Wooly knows something. Maybe Wooly has seen what happens to children who follow the adventures too far. Maybe Wooly is trying to break the fourth wall, to communicate with the real viewers rather than the fictional adventurers in the tapes. Maybe Wooly is trapped in these tapes and has learned, through repetition and horror, that the adventures always end badly. The tragedy is that warnings in children's media are often ignored. Children watching these tapes probably think Wooly is being overly cautious, a worrywart, the character who's fun to dismiss. They don't realize that Wooly's warnings are genuine, that Wooly has seen the end of this story and is desperately trying to prevent it from happening again. There's also the question of why Wooly can warn. If the tapes are controlled by whatever force creates them, why does Wooly have the agency to issue warnings? Is Wooly a glitch in the system, a consciousness that emerged where none should exist? Or is Wooly part of the design, a false warning meant to make the danger seem more thrilling, more real? Either way, Wooly represents a voice of resistance within the Mascot horror universe, a character who's aware enough to know something is wrong and brave enough to try to communicate it, even knowing that most viewers won't listen. Baby tattletales banish Mama ritually, and now we arrive at the most explicitly ritual element of this segment, the tattletales. Baby tattletales, plural, suggesting multiple entities, and their target, Mama. But this isn't a simple rejection or escape. This is banishment. This is ritual. Rituals require knowledge. They require preparation, specific actions performed in specific order. The baby tattletales performing a ritual means they have access to occult knowledge, means they understand forces beyond the physical world, means they know how to manipulate reality through ceremonial action. Why do they need to banish Mama? Because Mama is something that can't be destroyed through ordinary means. Mama is powerful, probably malevolent, certainly dangerous. The baby tattletales can't fight her directly. They can't kill her. They can't escape her. Their only option is banishment, to send her away, to exile her from this reality, or at least from their immediate vicinity. The parent-child dynamic here is crucial. In normal families, children depend on mothers. The idea of children having to banish their own mother, having to perform a ritual to remove her from their lives, is deeply disturbing. It suggests a relationship that's been completely inverted, where the maternal figure isn't protective but predatory, where the children must defend themselves against the one who should be defending them. And ritually tells us this has happened before or has been prepared for. Someone taught the baby tattletales this ritual. Someone passed down the knowledge of how to banish Mama. Maybe previous generations of tattletales. Maybe some external force that recognized the danger Mama posed. Either way, the banishment is formalized, codified, a ceremony that must be performed correctly or it won't work. What does the ritual involve? We can imagine candles, symbols, words spoken in languages that predate language. We can imagine the baby tattletales arranged in a circle, their innocent voices speaking incantations that should never come from children's mouths. We can imagine Mama fighting against the banishment, reality bending as she refuses to go, the baby tattletales straining to complete the ritual before Mama breaks free and stops them. And even if the banishment succeeds, it's probably temporary. Rituals that banish don't usually seal permanently. Mama will find her way back eventually. The baby tattletales are buying time, not winning permanently, which means they'll have to perform the ritual again, and again, and again. An eternal cycle of banishment and return. Children forever forced to exile their mother, forever aware that she'll come back, forever preparing for the next confrontation. These 5 facts, Riley's curse tapes, the Charles cult eggs, Rambley's hidden secrets, Woolly's warnings, and the Tattletale's ritual banishment, they represent a different kind of horror than what we've explored before. This isn't corporate evil. This isn't science gone wrong. This is something older, something that exists in the shadows of reality, something that uses mascots and media and children's entertainment as vessels for purposes we can barely comprehend. Rituals and cults suggest organization, intention, continuity across time. They suggest that mascot horror isn't accidental or recent. It's ancient. It's been happening for as long as we've been creating characters and stories for children. Maybe longer, because children are liminal beings. They exist between worlds, not yet fully socialized into adult reality, still capable of believing in magic, still seeing things that adults have learned to ignore. Children make perfect targets for occult forces precisely because they're open, vulnerable, believing. And mascots are perfect vessels. They're already partially alive in children's imaginations. They already have power, already command attention and affection. All it takes is a little push, a little ritual, a little curse, and the mascot becomes something more, something real, something dangerous. The supernatural corruption we've discussed isn't separate from the corporate horror. They're intertwined. Maybe the corporations stumbled onto something old, repurposed it, industrialized it. Maybe the cults have been using corporations all along, finding willing partners who would build the infrastructure the cults needed to spread their influence. Or maybe it's simpler and more terrifying. Maybe mascots have always been cursed. Maybe from the moment we started creating characters for children, we opened a door we didn't know existed, and things came through that door, things that learned to mimic joy and color and song, things that wear mascot costumes not as disguises, but as their true forms. Riley uncovered the tapes and unleashed the curse. The Charles cult spawns trains from eggs, vehicles for purposes we don't understand. Rambley hides secrets in the park, protecting or imprisoning knowledge too dangerous to speak. Woolly warns from within the tapes, a voice of resistance that nobody heeds. And the baby tattletales perform their ritual, banishing Mama over and over in an endless cycle of supernatural self-defense. Each of these facts is a window into a larger world of occult horror, of forces that predate corporations and will outlast them. The science and the business are just surface layers. Underneath, in the dark, old powers move according to rules we don't understand, using our children and our entertainment and our beloved characters for purposes that have nothing to do with joy. This is what makes mascot horror so pervasive, so inescapable. It's not just a genre. It's not just a collection of games and videos and stories. It's a recognition of something true, that the things we create for children carry power we don't fully control. That innocence and horror are more closely linked than we want to admit. That the moment we give a character a name and a face and a personality, we risk giving it something else too: agency, desire, the ability to become more than we intended. The rituals continue. The cults spawn their eggs. The warnings go unheeded. The banishments are temporary. And the mascots watch and wait, and sometimes, when the conditions are right, they act. We've explored the corporate abyss and the supernatural darkness. But there's one final layer to examine. The layer that contains all the others, that makes sense of everything we've discussed. The meta layer. The recognition that mascot horror exists not just in the stories, but in the spaces between them, in the way we talk about them, in the way they connect and build and create a universe larger than any single narrative. That's our next destination, the final segment, the meta layer. But for now, rest with the knowledge of curses and cults, of warnings and rituals, of children forced to banish their own mothers over and over in ceremonies that never quite work. The supernatural corruption runs deep, and it's not finished with us yet.